Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar Top 10 video. This is going to be a bit of a special one in that it's a top 10 video, but it's also going to be my kind of preview video for the upcoming comic, Avatar The Last Airbender Smoke and Shadow Part 1. So what the video is going to be is basically top 10 reasons you should be excited for the release of this book on September 23rd. So we are still a good ways off, but it is the kind of biggest upcoming thing that we have to look forward to. So let's get straight into this top 10 with what I consider to be an obvious point, but a perfect number one talking point to start off with. And that is just that this book is going to be our first major piece of new Avatar content since the end of The Legend of Korra. We obviously got the Ty Lee comic book Sisters, a month or so ago, but that was just a couple of pages long. And as cool and as interesting as that was, there wasn't really a lot to discuss or really sink your teeth into. It was more of just a kind of preview to kind of just like, okay, here's something for Free Comic Book Day, but the big book is on its way later this year. And this is the longest wait that we've had basically for a new comic since the comics have started. Usually it's just like 4 or 5 months between the end of a comic and the release of the next one, but with this one it is approaching kind of closer to basically nearly a year between the end of like the Rift and the start of this book in September. So it's kind of in that way kind of bad timing. Like if I was kind of in charge of Dark Horse, I definitely would have made it so that the end of Korra would coincide with the start of a new comic, or we wouldn't have to wait too long for it to start. So clearly something happened here. They planned out either a lot and they just needed time to make it happen, or something kind of just happened here. But either way, we're getting this book on September 23rd, and this is a big deal, and I think the fandom should make a big deal about it. It should not be treated the same way as previous comic releases have been, that it's just, no, it's not as good as Korra, it's always going to play second fiddle to Korra and everything that happens with Korra. And this time Korra's over. This time, when this book comes out, it will be this will be the major piece of news in our fandom. And I hope that the people who perhaps have a slight interest in the comics and who haven't really been posting a lot about them, talking about them, finally do come out and acknowledge the comics and embrace them. I've definitely made it a point on my channel to focus very heavily on these comics, that when there's like a new preview or something like that that comes out, I make it a big deal. Like, this is a big news post here. We've got preview pages for this book. We've got a new book announced. This is just as big as the announcement of a new series, because it is a new series, just a comic book series. And so I'm definitely going to make a big deal about this book when it comes out. I'm going to review it for the site. We're going to do a podcast on it. I'm going to review it here on YouTube. But I think a lot about the future of our fandom going forward is really going to depend on how people react to this book coming out. If it just is completely brushed aside and only like places like my channel and the podcast cover it and nowhere else really covers it, then it's just kind of remain a little bit stagnant. I'm super interested in how this book sells as well, because it doesn't have the kind of Korra series to always be this kind of Avatar thing that it's referencing in some way. So I'd be very interested to see, do people who maybe don't follow the fandom as closely but like the comics, how this book actually sells. But either way, this is big. This is a big release, and the fandom should make a big deal about it. So that's just the first point I want to make. My second talking point is getting more into the actual focus on what this book is actually going to be about. And a lot of that is going to be about the Zuko family dynamic. This is the point for number 2. This is going to be so interesting that this is going to take place, it's going to resemble more closely taking place after the Search than the Rift, because of the way the continuity seems to happen is that like the Rift is going to take place concurrently with the start of Smoke and Shadow. So Aang and Co might not be in the book after a certain point in part 1, and then they'll come back into the story later on after the Rift has taken place. So in terms of the Zuko focus and stuff like that, we're basically picking up directly after the Search. So what we're going to get to see here, which is going to be a really big and exciting thing, is Zuko's interactions with his mother Ursa. And as much as this is an important thing for his character, we really, in the grand scheme of things, don't have a massive amount of focus on. We've never had a massive amount of focus on that mother-son relationship. So it's going to be cool to see what that relationship is like now that kind of Ursa kind of has a kind of other family of her own, and how that her current family integrates into her kind of old family. How does what's Zuko's relationship like with Norin, who's kind of his father-in-law now? He seems to already have a good relationship with his sister-in-law, Ki, but now that Ursa has kind of changed her face back to normal, Ki is kind of afraid of her mother because she's suddenly seen her mother's face completely change, and has found out a lot about her mother she didn't know about. So that's a super interesting dynamic that you have here. Just how these two families kind of merge together now that they're the kind of Fire Nation royal family. How does the Fire Nation in general react to the return of Zuko now with this kind of other family? How do they react to Ursa returning? There's going to be so many interesting interactions about Ursa. And as much as the search was a big deal about finding Ursa, it's almost more interesting now to see how other characters react to her. We've even seen the preview, Team Avatar's first interactions with Ursa, and she's calling Aang Avatar and stuff like that. So there's some cool stuff definitely coming up down the line, and I definitely think one of the big things is going to be just whatever makes Ki get over the fact that her mother face may have changed, but she's still her mother, and what that relationship is like with Zuko and Ki and so on. But I'll talk more about this as we go on. I just want to make some more specific points about that as we go through this, but just seeing that new royal family dynamic is going to be very interesting, because much of the plot is about kind of obviously this kind of new Ozai society rebellion happening, and him trying to protect his family who's just got back together. So my third point that I want to make is the Zuko-Mai relationship. This is finally going to be a book that returns to focusing on that. They broke up in The Promise. We've had the Free Comic Book Rebound, which kind of focused on Mai and her kind of thoughts about the breakup, and she seems kind of open to starting that relationship again. And I think with Zuko, what we've realized over the last couple of books is that he's gotten through the issues that basically caused the breakup to happen in the first place. He has his mother back. He feels more confident as a leader. And the setup for this book is obviously that Mai is actively going against her father, who is the leader of the New Ozai Society. She is going to be the leader of this kind of rebellion faction that's against the New Ozai Society. And then Zuko's just kind of in the middle of this kind of almost battle between the New Ozai Society and Mai's rebellion. We don't know the full extent of what exactly is happening, how big is Mai's rebellion, or is it just a kind of personal thing? But either way, you have this other family dynamic going on, that Zuko's just got his family back together, and Mai has kind of got most of her family back together, but there's this issue with her father, Ukano, which I'll get into in the next point. But either way, they seem to be hinting that this is going to be the book where Mai and Zuko get back together. I really can't see them going any other way than this relationship coming back together, and effectively, not right now, but confirming that, Izumi is the daughter of Mai and Zuko, that is Mai's wife. Zuko's wife is Mai. I just think they set it up too well in Avatar The Last Airbender to just take it apart in the comics now and try and set up some other relationship for why that happened. This, to me, makes sense, and it would be a perfect situation that before they meet, Mai is kind of actively doing a rebellion against a faction that is against Zuko. So she's kind of fighting for him without actually directly being with him. So however that exactly relationship comes back together, whatever their kind of apology scene is going to be really cool, I think. So I'm really excited, because it is one of my favorite ships in the show. I just think Mai and Zuko really kind of complete each other. Zuko kind of helps Mai to be a bit more in touch with her emotions, and Mai kind of calms Zuko down a bit, who kind of almost gets too emotional about things. So in many ways they kind of complete each other, and they kind of make a perfect couple. My fourth point is getting more into the other side of the plot. That's the politics plot about the Kimura Kage, which is this kind of group of spirits that is kind of legend. And they're basically asking Ukano to basically fast forward the new Ozai Society plans to basically take out Zuko, like assassinate him, take control of the Fire Nation, and return it back to the way that Ozai ran the place. Now, the big question here is, obviously, is the Kimura Kage a spirit, or is it people with a political agenda dressed up as spirits to kind of get Ukano under kind of their control because they know he's somewhat respectful of the spirits? So there's an interesting plot about who the Kimura Kage are. Like some of my speculation early on would be that potentially the kind of evil fire sages that were working for Ozai, that obviously got kind of captured at some point in the series, and obviously Aang and Co met the one good fire sage who helped them in that episode. So I think they could be the Kimura Kage, but again, we're not really sure about that. But either way, Ukano is running this faction that is against Zuko. It doesn't seem massively big right now, so the Kimura Kage is kind of forcing him to fast forward his plans and basically activate this assassination plot much quicker than he originally planned to. So the setup at the start of the book is that basically we see Zuko, Ursa, and so on the boat, just about to return to the Fire Nation. They're going to have this kind of parade thing once they get back to the capital, and they're going to like strike during this kind of parade ceremony thing. So what exactly happens from there, that's where we're not really sure. That's where the preview ends, and we don't know what happens. But they're setting up this really interesting plot between Zuko is the new Fire Lord. He's established some of his ideals in the Fire Nation and is trying to change things. Ukano wants things back to the way they were, and then Mai is just kind of against her father. She kind of wants her father back normally, and is kind of against him for his political beliefs and what he's kind of done to their family. Like even the mother has left the father and stuff like that. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. Point number 5 I want to make here is the potential for getting to see Ozai again. We haven't seen Ozai like in present day since the promise. Obviously he was in flashbacks and stuff like that during the search, and they kind of revealed a lot of stuff in the search about kind of previous conversations. But the last time in the kind of present day we saw him was towards the end of the promise, and obviously Zuko was apparently being influenced by Ozai, and he was kind of forcing Zuko to make the wrong decisions, but then he made the right decisions, and so on. Now that Ursa is returning to the Fire Nation, does she have anything to say to Ozai? Will at some point she confront Ozai about everything that happened, asking him about maybe the way he raised Azula, talking to him about what he did to Zuko, like burning him or stuff like that. She obviously, like, she probably heard about Zuko being scarred, but we haven't seen her directly like address that fact. So there's a lot of interesting things that could happen just around characters interacting with Ozai. Primarily Ursa, I think, is the main character I'd like a conversation with. But also, you know, Azula, Ozai would be an interesting interaction as well. But we'll get to Azula towards the end of this video. I just think it would be really cool to at least include a couple of scenes with Ozai. But my 6th point is this new kind of aspect of the plot we didn't know about before, but recent solicitations revealed the full description for the book, and they revealed a new kind of plot point. And that is that at some point something's going to happen, and we're going to get to reveal that children in the Fire Nation are beginning to go missing under mysterious circumstances. And that's all we get. No information about what exactly this is happening for or for what reason, but children in the Fire Nation are going missing. Now, maybe there's some sort of a tie-in to obviously the headband episode, where obviously Aang kind of helped his class at that point in time to kind of see the error in their ways and maybe change things for the better. Maybe those children are being kidnapped or something like that because they have these new ideals now that Zuko's the Fire Lord, and they're being kidnapped before they can implement anything. And, obviously the new Ozai society would maybe want to kind of get these kids out of the equation because they could change things going forward. But other than that, I'm not really sure why, like, someone would want to, like, kidnap children. Other than to kind of maybe just make it look like, hey, look, our Fire Lord, our new Fire Lord is just recently come into being in charge, and look, all our kids are being kidnapped under his watch and nothing's being done about it. It could be just this kind of way to kind of discredit Zuko's kind of quality of being a Fire Lord or something like that. But that's interesting. Like, it's a new plot we didn't know about. We knew about the political stuff. We knew about some of the character stuff that was happening. But this idea of children going missing was not something we knew about. Number 7 is that potentially this is going to be the last comic that we get in this kind of time period. Rumors are around that come the end of Smoke and Shadow, the next series is going to take place after a time skip. Because I think the logical thing is that, okay, by the end of Smoke and Shadow, we will have had 4 stories that have roughly taken place over the course of the same couple of months. And it doesn't make sense for Team Avatar to just experience this much drama, this many kind of bad guys, villains, all in just a quick space of time. It would make sense that at some point there is just a kind of peaceful time when not a lot of drama stuff happens. And a lot of the more interesting stories as we go forward with these characters is going to be about them getting married, them having kids, them reacting to having kids and stuff like that. You need the characters to kind of be older for more stuff to happen, more interesting plots to develop, and just give time for new villains to actually come about. So I definitely think that's probably a good idea, that they don't just try too heavily to make a story happen the following month, the following week after the previous story. They've connected them together fairly well, but at this point they're maybe stretching it a little bit if they try and do any more. So I definitely want to see at least a couple of year time skip. Just to see something like, hey, we get like 20-year-old like Aang and like 21, 22-year-old Katara, and we get the proposal scene. We get them being married or something like that. We get the reveal that one of the characters is like pregnant or something like that. Skip ahead to maybe someone's already had a kid and how they're reacting to being like parents and stuff like that. There's so much cool stuff you could do just in terms of like the whole kind of shipping dynamic sort of thing that would be really interesting. Because it's cool seeing our characters like they are at this point in time, but it is going to get a bit like, really? Does it really make sense that another crazy thing happened immediately after this thing? And especially if they do something like Zuko and Mai get back together and they basically confirm she is going to be basically the Fire Lady from here on out. It would make sense that you kind of skip ahead to a point where he proposes to her or they're married already or something. So there's that. Going to number 8. We don't actually know what like Team Avatar's involvement is going to be in this story. Like, we don't know what Aang is going to be doing. We don't know what Sokka, Katara, Toph, or Suki and stuff like that are really going to be doing. And Aang is on the cover of like at least the first volume. And if, as my prediction is kind of, I've said my prediction about when this takes place, if that's true, then he potentially isn't in the book outside of kind of what we see in the preview. Maybe we see him for a couple of other pages, but then he goes away. Because, as I said, I think that the way they're going to do it is that the boat arrives, Zuko, Ursa, and so on get off, and Aang and co go back to basically Yudao and stuff like that to start the rift, and then the rift is going to take place, and then they're going to come back into the story later on. So either Aang and co don't have a plot right now, and maybe we'll just come in at the end as kind of cameo roles, like more of Zuko's friends to help end the fights or something like that. I don't really know what they're up to. And I kind of appreciate this because we are going to need a lot of time to deal with all the Zuko family stuff, deal with the Zuko-Mai relationship. And especially, I think, just give May more time as a character on her own. Like, I assume them getting back together is probably not going to happen until probably midway through part 2 or sometime during the part 3, the third book. So I think we're going to get a lot of time with May on her own in perhaps the first and second volume of this series. And it's really probably going to get her across a lot better as a character, that she's going to have time on her own. So I think rightfully so, they're going to spend the time on who they need to spend the time on. Ursa, Zuko, May, Ukano, the Fire Nation politics and stuff like that, and then maybe Aang and Co have another plot at some point later on. But I just find it very interesting that every other one of these comics, even The Search, we roughly knew what Aang and Co were going to be up to because Azula was involved, so they were kind of there as security. So it's going to be interesting if they're even that heavily involved in the story at all. Number 9, I suppose Ty Lee is an interesting one because the recent Free Comic Book Day book Sisters was all about Ty Lee, and that introduced us to her sisters, her identical sisters. It basically made the point of showing that she's sticking around with the Kyoshi Warriors. That's a thing. It also links into the fact that Ty Lee is in the preview for Smoke and Shadows, and she goes to meet up with May. So I'm assuming that what they're probably going to do is that Ty Lee will be part of May's rebellion, and you're doing this subtle thing where you're gradually beginning to bring basically the group known as Ozai's Angels kind of back together, the friendship group of Ty Lee, May, and Azula. But Azula's the last point, which I'll get to in a minute. I think they can do some interesting things with Ty Lee. Her character came through a lot better in Sisters than it did in the show, I think. There were only a few moments in the show where she really came across as like a character and not just, oh, she's the acrobatic fighter girl. So I think they could do some stuff with her being May's friend and maybe being one of the ones to kind of start May and Zuko's relationship again, kind of bring them back together. That would be a cool moment. And just in general, I do want some more screen time for her because I do find her to be a pretty interesting character. But point number 10, the last point I want to make, is Azula. We have had it heavily hinted to us that Azula is going to be in this book at some point. We don't know if it's part 1, part 2, or part 3, but it's heavily hinted she will return at some point. Now, the reason she is such a big talking point going into this book is that the way she kind of exited The Search set up so many interesting things for her. She basically had the chance to use this evidence that was fake, but she had this chance to use this evidence to basically, quote-unquote, prove that Zuko was not the heir to the Fire Nation throne. And she had the chance to escape with it, but she left the evidence there and just ran off on her own. She had the chance to basically try and make things up with her mother, but ran off. And they've been very subtly setting up this kind of redemption arc, kind of, for Azula, that she's beginning to realize she's kind of always being used by Ozai, that Ozai doesn't really care for her all that much, and that her issues with her mother are such an important part of who she is. And it's very obvious, I think, at this stage that they role-reversed Zuko and Mai in the comics. No, not Zuko and Mai, Zuko and Azula in the comics, that in the series, Zuko was always the one who didn't know what to do, who was kind of lost in his path and had to find the right way. Azula always knew what she wanted to do. By the end of the series, they kind of had her lose her mind at the loss of her friends, that betrayal, and as we see her in the comics, she's just completely lost as to what to do. She's still kind of going through with Ozai's plan to kind of get Zuko off the throne, but then she kind of gives up on that and kind of runs away. She's in a very kind of emotionally unstable state. She doesn't know what to do now. Whereas Zuko has got his mother back, has dealt with becoming the leader of the Fire Nation. Yes, he still has this issue with his girlfriend to deal with May, but fundamentally he is in a fairly stable position at this point in time. And where they go with those two and their relationship, Azula's relationship with Ursa, I think they could do some really interesting stuff with that dynamic that both of Ursa's daughters have issues with her at this point in time. Key because obviously Ursa's face has changed, but now Azula, because of everything that happened before, this feeling that Ursa never cared for Azula, that she always thought Azula was a monster and stuff like that. We found out obviously in the search that that wasn't the case, that Ursa was very open to Azula. She said goodbye to Azula as well as Zuko on the night she left. She does care for Azula, though she's definitely kind of worried about the way her daughter has kind of gone in terms of her kind of mentality, her style of doing things. So what Azula has done since she left in the search is interesting. Where they find her again will be interesting. And as I said in the last point, they're bringing Tylee and Mai back together, who are ultimately the two people in betraying Azula, basically made this drastic turn for Azula happen. And we saw that Aang, Zuko, Katara, all of these characters to some extent felt a little bit of sympathy for Azula in the search, and they want her to kind of make a change for the better because they know she can be helpful and good and stuff like that. Maybe Mai and Tylee will begin to see this. They'll begin to see that at the point where they made the decision, betraying her was the right move, but for Azula's health going forward, they have to fix the relationship that they have, and maybe it'll be all about Azula learning the true value of kind of friendship and just what it means to actually have friends, means for people to care about you, and stuff like that. So I think she's probably the most interesting thing that we know is going to happen, but we have no idea how it's going to happen. Is she going to basically turn up as a member of the new Ozai Society? Is she going to turn up and defend Zuko against the new Ozai Society and maybe join Mai's resistance? Is she the Kimura Kage running things from the background? I'm not really sure. But there's a lot of stuff that is kind of set up, that is kind of hinted towards Azula. And we basically know she's going to be in the book. We don't have 100% confirmation that she's in for sure, but she's going to be in this book. They have to address it. It was the biggest open cliffhanger from the end of the search, and it's going to be really powerful when we get her because she's such a beloved character despite being a villain. And I think the way they've done her arc so far, this potential redemption arc, it's going to be really interesting when she does come back. The way her character was developed in the search was really good. But they're my 10 points about why you should be excited for Smoke and Shadow. I've got myself more excited for the book just in talking about it in this much depth. So in the comments, definitely let me know what you're most excited for in this book, what you want to see happen, some of your speculations for Smoke and Shadow, and just your thoughts on everything I've said here. Also in the comments, let me know what you want my next top 10 video to be. Any suggestions are definitely welcome. I'm always looking for new topics. Yeah, other than that, that has been the end of the video. Smoke and Shadows Part 1 is out September 23rd in comic book stores.